ATP and ADP, and cellular respiration. Our main speakers in this project will be Morgan Hill, Justin Honer, and Rebecca Late. This project is mainly this video is mainly supposed to be used for people who are studying sports exercise science and biology, and is also very helpful for those who are interested in athletics and who are athletes themselves to view, so that they know what is done on their body, what the toll on their body for running is. And so now we will begin with Rebecca.
That's it.
ATP is the end product of cellular respiration. ATP consists of 3 phosphate groups with an adenine ring and a ribose sugar. This is how it gets its name, adenosine triphosphate. The 3 phosphate groups are here with the 3 phosphoruses. The ribose sugar is right here, and the adenine ring is here. Carl Lohmann discovered ATP and that it existed in 1929. He didn't know all the fine details that it consisted of a phosphate group, ribose sugar, and adenine ring. ATP is an organic molecule because it consists of carbon in water, and this means that the phosphorus bonds are weaker than the hydrogen bonds in water, so the hydrogen bonds break up the phosphorus bonds here. And then in nature, this exists as in either ATP -4. This is the most common form of ATP found in nature because it has 4 more electrons, so it gives it a -4 charge. Another way it is found, but it's less common, is ATP -3. And these are the most common ones in nature, but ATP with a -4 charge is the most common. So during cellular respiration, ATP and ADP are converted back and forth between each other. On average, there is 0.2 moles of ATP in a normal human body, and then the total number of ATP to ADP usually remains constant. Usually there is 5 ATP molecules to 1 ADP molecule in the body. ATP allows the body to work and do things. So it cannot be stored, but it has a very high potential energy. And most people use their body weight of ATP today. So most people use about their body weight of ATP per day. A person that weighs 150 pounds uses 150 pounds of ATP. And human cells need hydrolysis of 100 to 150 molecules of ATP daily. This equals about 50 to 75 kilograms. And since I mentioned before, ATP cannot be stored because of its high potential energy, so it needs to be converted into a molecule called ADP. And it does this by having this break off, and it loses a phosphate group, and a hydrogen is added on. And this is shown in ADP over here. This is shown in ADP over here because there is 2 phosphorus molecules instead of 3 in the previous ATP. And both ADP and ATP are organic molecules, and this is a storable form. It has a lot less potential energy than ATP, so it can last in the body longer. Then this NATP is essential to the flow of energy in living cells, and since this and ADP are very similar, the phosphate group is attached at the 5' position, and then to get ATP you need to add a phosphate group onto this, And then there is, in the process of losing the phosphate group, you get 3.5 kilojoules per mole of. Thank you for listening to my segment on ATP and ADP. Our next speaker is Rebecca.
Hello, I'm going to be talking to you about the respiratory system. So the first thing you need to know is the actual buildup of the lungs and that whole system. So the first thing is, you have your nose here and your mouth, and that's how you absorb all that oxygen, and then it goes down the pharynx and the larynx that's here. Next, it will go to the trachea, which is more or less around here near your sternum, but it's more inwards. It'll then go down to the bronchi and then to the alveoli. So think of it as an upside down tree. The trachea is the trunk, and then it goes out into the bronchioli, which are the branches, and the alveoli, which are the tiny little leaves. So, the alveoli, that's where the gas exchange happens. It is where the oxygen will move along the gradients from an area of high particle pressure to a low particle pressure. So, you breathe in the air, which is high in oxygen, and then while the blood is being pumped from the lungs, so you breathe in air that is high in oxygen, and the blood being pumped into the lungs is low in oxygen. So when the oxygen goes to the alveoli, that gas exchange happens, and so it's switched. So now the blood is high in oxygen, and blood that is in the lungs now is high in CO2. Next, we have to move on to the cardiovascular. So, first what happens is the blood that is high. So first, the oxygen poor blood goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Then the gas exchange happens. That's what I just talked about. Next, the oxygen-rich blood will go through the left atrium to the left ventricle. This then goes to the tissue. The oxygen went from your lungs to the heart, and then it pumped it into the muscle. So let's say I'm contracting my muscle here. I breathed in the air, went through the heart, then it sent the oxygen here to the muscle. So the oxygen is used, went back to the heart, it all starts all over again. Thank you for listening to my segment about the lungs and the heart. We are now moving on to the cellular respiration segment with Morgan Hill. Back to you, Morgan.
Oh, greetings. Hey, everybody. I just got done reading, a little bit up on cellular respiration. Thanks for Rebecca for talking about that last segment, so I guess we're moving into our next one, which is cellular respiration. So, moving on and end everything. All organisms start cellular respiration in the same basic way. They usually take whatever molecule, such as glucose, and turn it into something that is actually usable by all organs. Cellular respiration can take place in about two ways. Anaerobic, which is without air, or oxygen for that matter, and aerobic, which is with air. Usually aerobic respiration yields a lot more ATP just because, it's usually using photosynthesis, or in this case for humans, it's taking it and converting it into an energy source that is viable for our body to accept, which is ATP. ATP, as it was previously discussed, is adenosine triphosphate and is one of the most potent things that we can use in our bodies. We usually get ATP by processing things such as food, water, anything that will give us energy in the first place. So some of these reactions usually take place in the cytoplasm of cells, and they convert all of that into glucose that is turned into a substrate called pyruvate. This is called, guess what? Glycolysis. Yeah, so oxygen isn't always going to be present, and typically when it isn't present, we go into something called anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, because there's lack of oxygen, usually means you can't produce as much ATP, meaning less energy overall. The overall output of ATP in an anaerobic respiration sort of setting is about 2. Now, 2, that's not really something you can live off of. Generally, if you were going off of 2 ATP per glucose molecule, you would be most likely dead by now. Or not dead, but very lethargic, very slow. Your body wouldn't be able to produce energy at an optimum level, and it would be very hard for you to live off of anything like that. So, usually when we breathe in oxygen, it's, so we can actually convert some of these ATP molecules into something that is viable for our body. Thank you for Rebecca for explaining how lungs are actually a component within this. It's actually a little bit easier to explain what else is going on inside of that as well. So the aerobic respiration part of this is a little bit harder to describe just because of the fact that you're using oxygen to convert this energy into something that is viable for our body. So the aerobic respiration usually gives us around...
Now we are going to be talking about the sliding filament theory. So I'm going to actually explain what is happening when your muscles are contracting. So here we have this lovely video of Justin running. And he's going to be just running while I explain what happens. So first you need to know that a muscle is made up of many layers. And I'm not going to go into all that because the main one that you need to know about is called the myofibril. So each of those is made up of a segment which is called a sarcomere. And that is what actually, that's what does the contracting. So in the sarcomere there are strands of myofilaments. This is the protein actin, and these are going to attach to the sarcomere, which is a very important component. Another component that you need to know is the myosin. Now, when your muscle is at rest, no strands are touching one another. There's nothing really happening there. The myosin strands, they also have ATP molecules attached to them, which is why we had to explain what ATP is and all that jazz. Another thing that happens is that your muscles are sort of stockpiling calcium ions, and these are going to be used in the actual contraction. So, what is it that actually starts this contraction? Well, there's a very complicated process, but I'm not really going to explain that part of it because that goes more into the neurons and the brain, and that's not what we're focusing on. So, what you need to know is that a neuron is going to be the stimulus, and it's going to send a signal. Eventually, that signal goes to the T-tubes. That's another one of those fancy layers in there. And this is going to start the whole process, and the calcium ions, which were stockpiled, they are going to diffuse. So those calcium ions are then going to change the shape of the proteins and drag the actin strands toward each other. That causes the sarcomere to then contract. This comes from the breaking of the ATP molecule. Now, if you want to stop this molecule, to stop this from happening, you have to have another ATP attached. So then this causes the muscle to relax and it brings it back to the resting state. And that is how the muscle contracts. Thank you for listening to my segment. And next we will move on to Katrina, who will talk to us about some real life situations.
Yeah, let them come in. They'll be our guests. Okay, is it on?
Mm-hmm.
Alright, I'm trying to think of what I want to say now.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh crap, I need one more thing. Make it a little higher.
Well, we have 2 weeks of vacation this year,
When?
December.
Awesome.
Time to get that cash flow.
Alright, so I'll give you 5.
Then we have 2 weeks and a day off.
Hold on, ready? 5.
Alright, so now that we got most of the science out of the way, I would like to start talking about and focusing on things that are very important to athletes in general and people who are trying to either lose weight or gain muscle by running or doing exercises that require a lot of leg work. And so while there are a lot of positives in running and exercising, such as it burns calories, it challenges your lower body, such as the legs and everything, it also strengthens your heart. There are still some downsides to this, because while it strengthens your heart, it also wears down the muscle and causes your heart to beat faster, which might lead to, in some cases, strain, cardiac arrest, some cases even death. And you see this kind of example more often in events such as marathons, where an individual is going to run 26 miles or more consistently and is continuously using their body and expecting their body to perform well in these cases. So what happens in this is that running causes a lot of strain in your muscles, and it causes the muscle to stiffen. And in response to this, the brain and the immune system gets a little worried, and they send a lot of enzymes to these areas in thinking that there is something that they need to recover. They need to protect, and they need to help. However, since there is nothing, they are basically just having this kind of like, it's just storming your body and kind of increasing blood flow to areas that don't need blood flow that much. Specifically, in this case, the heart, which often means that the right ventricle becomes overwhelmed, and it can cause these sort of issues. So that was our presentation. Thank you for listening.
Cut. Scene. Done. How do you stop this?
Yep. Just press that little red button.
That's how you end the scene. Yeah.